What's up? Welcome to a special edition of the BLS podcast. I am here as promised to discuss this conversation that happened on First Take on Friday between Ryan Clark, Chris Canty, and Stephen A. Smith about Dak Prescott. So let's get into it. It's been a jam-packed couple of days for me. Friday especially, I was working all day, and when I got a break, I was checking Twitter, and I saw that Corey, shout out to Corey, had tagged me in a quote tweet of a post that was made by Ryan Clark. And I really do love the fact that I have followers who know me well enough to be like, okay, so Ryan Clark posted something about Dak Prescott, and Jazz hasn't said anything. I wonder if she saw this. Like, let me bring it to her attention. So shout out to Corey for that. And so if you follow me on Twitter, you know, I said a couple of things about it, and I kind of teased that there would be more to come later, but then two things happened. One, I wanted to make sure that I watched the full segment because what Ryan Clark posted was his response to Stephen A. Smith. So I wanted to make sure that I understood what Stephen A. Smith actually said and also share that with you guys if it was relevant. And then another thing that happened was I started actually writing my response. So any of y'all who remember that long response that I made to Micah Parsons' whole situation when he was calling out the media, it was supposed to be something like that. But once that post got to about 3 times the length of that other tweet, I was kind of like, okay, we need to bring this to another platform. Brother L, shout out to Brother L, also publicly challenged me to make a recorded response. So here we are. I said time permitting, and so yeah, better late than never. So when I was watching the segment, I'm not even gonna hold you. Like, the stuff that Stephen A. Smith said pissed me all the way off. And that is what led to the super, super long response. So I'm gonna share a good portion of that conversation with you, mainly because I know there are a lot of people in Cowboys Nation who do not watch First Take. A lot of it has to do with conversations like this one, if I'm being honest, but they don't watch First Take. And so unless it's through someone like me, you're not going to hear the whole conversation. So I'm more than happy to cross enemy lines, if you will, and bring back the information so that everybody has context for what was actually discussed. So I'm going to do that thing I do where I basically just play the video and I'll stop and I'll respond to everything, and you'll see what it was that pissed me off and what I agreed with and what I didn't agree with. So just for context, like I said, on Friday, Chris Canty and Ryan Clark joined Stephen A. Smith on First Take. They got onto the topic of Dak Prescott, and here's how that conversation went.
All right, let's take it to Jerry's world, where Dak Prescott and the Cowboys prepare to take on the Rams in Dallas. Big D, 2-2 in its last 4 games. And they face the Rams, who are ranked 6th in total offense this season. After Micah Parsons said his piece on the critics, Dak says he's not worried about any of it.
I've been on this organization 8 years, going on in my 8th year, that whether you about it or not, it's not going to stop. That's just how it goes. And to me, it's fun. It's fun because when things go our way and when we win this thing, it's going to make it all that much sweeter. And say what you want, we get to go out there and we get to do it.
I mean, could he have said anything more perfect than that?
No, I don't think you can.
So in response to what Dak said and whether or not it was perfect, I don't know what the perfect response to that would be, honestly, but I do think it was appropriate. I think Dak is tired of talking about it, as he should be. On Micah Parsons' platform, he made the decision to have that conversation and kind of go at the media. So props to him for standing up for Dak Prescott. And if you watch the full interview with Dak that clip came from, which is on the Dallas Cowboys YouTube, you know, Dak does say that, you know, he definitely appreciates Micah standing up for him. But, you know, Micah Parsons made the decision to start that conversation and to have that conversation. Dak, on the other hand, seems to really just want to focus on other things. He's been around longer than Micah. So he's kind of at the point where he's just like, hey, I'm whether you can change it or not, like, and he seems to believe that he can't. But whether you can change it or not, he's done with it. He's done talking about it. He would rather focus on something else. And you know, I can't really blame him because it doesn't seem like anything is changing on that front. So like, why keep going back and forth about the criticism and what it is and what it's not, you know? I'm sure it gets old after a while.
Perfection. RC?
No, I love it. I mean, I think Dak Prescott has had his time there, though. You know, Dak Prescott has been through this over and over again, and he's now finally reached a point where he can be truthful. He knows that people are going to talk negatively when you play bad in Dallas. But when you play well, there's also a lot of high praise.
I don't know about that part. I don't know if there's actually a lot of high praise. I feel like there's a lot of goalposts moving when they play well, but let's keep going.
And so if he finds a way to win a championship, he understands what that'll mean for his legacy, what that will mean for his resume, and the way that he will make bank off of it. So he's now gotten to a point, talk how you talk. I get to go on the field and I get to say, or get to have the last word. And the last word has to be winning a championship. Because if it's not, none of this talk will cease. Chris has been there, he understands it. Stephen A's talked about it his entire career. It's different when you wear the star on your helmet, and you have to have thick enough skin to play through it, listen through it, and persevere through it. We just haven't seen Dak Prescott nor the Dallas Cowboys win the big games during his tenure.
No doubt, RC. It's the most visible franchise.
So out of everything Ryan Clark said, this whole idea of Dak Prescott not winning the big games is probably the thing that I have the biggest issue with, but they all kind of echo that. So I'm going to save my rebuttal for that until the end.
In all the sports, and that's why you're going to have a heightened degree of scrutiny when it comes to what you do. But Dak also understands that he's not going to be judged on what they do in the regular season. They've had back-to-back 12-win seasons. First time they've had that in a decade. It's all about what happens once they get to the second season and being able to end the 27-year conference championship game drought, the 5th longest drought in all of pro football. Dak's predecessor, Tony Romo, had great regular season stats. But what's the criticism on Romo? He didn't get to the big game. And so it doesn't.
I'm going to be honest, I hate this graphic. I hate this graphic because we're talking about Dak Prescott, and you put up this, postseason record as though this is a Dak Prescott record. I've said time and time again, Dak Prescott did not come out the womb taking snaps for the Dallas Cowboys. Please stop bringing up this whole since 1995 thing when we're talking about Dak Prescott, because most of that has nothing to do with him. And I, for the life of me, cannot understand why we are taking the entire postseason record of an entire franchise and putting it on the shoulders of Dak Prescott, as though franchises are obligated to get a championship once every 25 to 30 years, and he's not fulfilling some obligation. No, there have been quarterbacks who took more than 8 seasons to get their Super Bowl. The performance of Dak Prescott is not, is not just so much worse than any other good quarterback that we've seen with a good team trying to get to a championship. We've seen this before, y'all. Chill the fuck out.
He didn't get to the big game. And so it doesn't matter whether or not you respond to the critics, the naysayers, because the only way you can silence any of them is by going out there and producing when it matters the most. So I think Dak is doing the right thing by cutting it off, and I also think it's setting a tone for the rest of the guys in the locker room that the focus needs to be on the task at hand, which is preparing themselves to try to go out there and get a win this weekend against the Rams, rather than worrying about all of the headlines that's being made about the Cowboys.
That last part was true.
Prescott. And it's something I wanted to bring up to both of y'all, because I want y'all to do this. Let's compare Dak Prescott's career to Troy Aikman.
Let's not, but go ahead.
I know you're thinking 3 Super Bowls.
Okay.
Here's what I want to stand out. Do you know that Dak Prescott has a better record than Troy Aikman in September, October, November,
oh Lord,
and December? But it's January where everything falls apart. And see what happens.
Now, let me tell you why those stats are dumb as fuck. And Stephen A isn't the only person to bring this up. So, I'm just going to say this, not only in response to Stephen A, but everybody who keeps bringing this up. So let me break this down a little bit more statistically for y'all. So the NFL playoffs is a single elimination tournament. So that means, first of all, there's 32 teams in the NFL, 14 of them make it to the playoffs. So that means those quarterbacks, regardless of what you think of them, if we're just talking about record, those quarterbacks are on a team that has a better regular season record than most teams in the NFL. And out of those 14 teams, only 8 of those teams advance to the second round. So that means 6 quarterbacks who make it to the playoffs are going to end up with a losing record in the playoffs of 0-1 because they don't have the next Sunday to get to 1-1 or the Sunday after that to get to 2-1. As soon as they lose, they're done. So you only have to lose one game to end up with a losing record. And then let's say you make it to the second round, okay? It gets kind of complicated from there because, if your team had a bye and you won in the second round, then you're 1-0. If you lose and you're still 0-1. But let's just suffice it to say that anybody who gets eliminated from the second round more than likely is going to have a record of 1-1. So that's a tied record. So you basically have to get to the third round of the playoffs before you have a winning record, whether it's 1-0 or 2-0, depending on whether or not you had that first round bye. I say all this to say, most quarterbacks, first of all, are not on a team that makes it to the playoffs at all because 18 teams won't even get there. And then from there, most quarterbacks are going to end up with a record of 0-1 or 1-1. So to talk about, you had a better record than Troy Aikman in the regular season, it doesn't even make sense to bring that up because, like I was saying, in the regular season, you have Sunday after Sunday, or I should say week after week, to keep winning and to bounce back from a loss and to improve your record, whereas in the playoffs, you don't. So it's just a ridiculous and silly thing to bring up. It's borderline irresponsible. And Chris Candy's in there pointing like, you make a good point. No, you don't. It's not a good point. I like how Ryan Clark is just looking down like, sure, whatever, dude. I know that's probably not what he's thinking, but yeah, I'm projecting my own thoughts. Let's keep going.
Is what we're not going to do is sit up here and allow Dak Prescott to emulate LeBron James and try to change some narrative. When we talk about Anthony Davis, we all recognize his greatness. We just looking for it more consistently because we know what it would mean to the success of the Los Angeles Lakers. We all know that the Dallas Cowboys got a crew, even with Trayvon Diggs out. But what is your quarterback going to do? All the other pieces are there. I have not heard one person, including you, RC, look at the Dallas Cowboys and say they don't have what it takes. Obviously,
as far as saying that they don't have what it takes, maybe you should have. Maybe not this year, but since we're talking about Dak Prescott's entire body of work, let's really think about it. Let's take the offensive line, for example, which is something that definitely impacts, as according to Mike McCarthy, your offensive line impacts play calling. And we can actually see, for anybody who actually watches these games and studies these games, you can see how who's on your offensive line and what they're capable of does impact the performance of the quarterback. It does impact the choices that they have and the decisions that they end up making, right? So right now, the Dallas Cowboys have their ideal, supposedly, starting five. But essentially, the offensive line has been in limbo since 2017. And then when it comes to other people on the roster, let's just go back and look at some of the headlines from last year. So we're going to put Dallas Cowboys, wide receivers. We're going to go to the news tab here. I'm telling y'all how to use Google to fact check these people. We're going to go to Google, we're going to go to tools, and we're going to change it from recent to a custom range. And we're going to say, so we're going to go July 1st of 2022 to, let's go to January 30th of 2023. Okay, so here's one headline. The wide receiver equation in Dallas will see T.Y. Hilton added to it officially when the Cowboys host the Eagles on Christmas Eve. Our wide receiver room was in such a state that T.Y. Hilton was seen as a savior for the wide receiver room. Now, this isn't to say anything bad about T.Y. Hilton. It's not that he's a bad player, but I mean, was he ever really a person that anybody said like, oh yeah, that'll make a wide receiver room elite? No, but they needed something. They needed some force, some addition so bad that it was just like, thank God for somebody who's capable of coming in and doing something. I remember the whole Odell Beckham Jr. thing. For the longest time, everybody was like, oh, they need Odell because they need somebody to help that room. Dak Prescott was thrown into people who can barely get playing time on their current teams now. Let's think about that for a second. Dak Prescott went to the playoffs with receivers and tight ends who are now with other teams, and they're barely getting snaps. Here's another headline. This was before the season even started. 5 notable free agent wide receivers Dallas Cowboys should consider. Also in August, Dallas Cowboys may still add a wide receiver to their roster. Another story about the receivers. Dallas Cowboys could fill positions of need with current free agents. Another headline from August. Dallas Cowboys banking on Dak Prescott's leadership to elevate inexperienced receivers. 3 wide receivers the Dallas Cowboys should consider trading for. This was from January. 3 ways to fix the Cowboys in 2023. Acquire another Pro Bowl caliber receiver. Add depth to both lines. Troy Aikman. This was in October of 2022. Troy Aikman says Cowboys should trade for wide receiver. The only positive headlines in here are about a few things that CeeDee Lamb did during games. But everything else is about, oh, they need to trade. They need a free agent. Here's another one from December. CeeDee Lamb has proven WR1 status, but Cowboys need others to step up. Here's another one from August. Cowboys promising wide receiver depth could be nothing more than a mirage. And so those are just a few of the headlines, but I'm basically scrolling down those. Like, if I were to actually go into the article, I could remind y'all of some of the questions that people had, not only about the wide receiver room, but there were questions about Ezekiel Elliott. There were questions about the offensive line. And there was also a good part of the season, if we want to talk about the other side of the ball and how that might have impacted games, there was a good part of the season where there was a lot of criticism about the Dallas Cowboys defense and their inability to stop the run. So to make this statement like nobody's looking at the Cowboys and saying that they don't have what it takes, maybe not this year, you know, and I would say this is one of the better years in terms of looking at the Cowboys and seeing how they're set up on both sides of the ball. I've talked to people who have been Cowboys fans for a really long time, and a lot of them are in this space where they're like, yeah, I don't remember the last time that we actually had dudes on both sides of the ball. And even then, even with that being the case, there's still a lot of people who are kind of like, yeah, I wouldn't be mad at them for doing a little bit of something before the trade deadline, though. So just spare me with this whole rhetoric about, oh, Dak Prescott has always had the best rosters. It's a myth.
See, we look at Philadelphia, we know what they could do. We look at San Francisco, we know what they could do. We thought that Detroit was on a come up until they went to bed last week, and we still haven't just thrown them out to pasture. But damn, you got your ass kicked, and now you got to get back to the drawing board if you're the Detroit Lions. We understand all of that. We get all of that. But nobody, Micah Parsons, nobody, Dak Prescott, nobody, Jerry Jones has looked at the Cowboys and their roster and said they ain't a part of the mix. We know they got what it takes. The question is, does your quarterback? That is the question. And then for him to say, when things go our way and we win this thing, is laughable. The man has 2 playoff wins in 9 years. 2 playoff wins in 9 years. The hell you mean win?
He can't be confident?
No. Actually, no. He can feign confidence, but don't.
Once again, if people are allowed in the playoffs to keep going, like, here's the thing I think people don't realize. Due to the nature of a single elimination playoff system, somebody is going to win. So it could be that you're the better team and you win. It could be that due to injuries on the opposing team or some other circumstance or luck, that you end up advancing. I just don't think it's fair to evaluate a quarterback and his value as an athlete based on postseason records. There are just too many factors that can contribute to what a person's postseason record is. And I'm going to go deeper into that after we finish this clip. So, you know, if you're like yelling at your screen right now and saying that I don't make sense, just give me a few minutes.
But let's be clear. He don't actually feel it. And if we're being honest, I'm talking to 2 champions. The brother's brilliant because I know I'm not. I listen to brilliance. Y'all teach me football every day. You understand? Make me better and better and better. You know I know. You know I've been reporting for 30 years. You know I've seen this. He talking and talking and talking. But at the end of the day, those brothers don't believe in him.
First of all, I'm sick of people talking about Dak Prescott's talking. He's contractually obligated to talk to the media. They go in the locker room, he has to talk to them. He's not going on social media or putting out these videos on YouTube. It's not like he needs to be heard so bad. He's obligated to talk to these people, and he does not control the questions that they ask. Like, come on, put some thought into the things that you say. Don't sit here and be like, Dak Prescott's talking and talking and talking. It's literally part of the job description, being a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, to talk to the media and answer their questions. So once again, miss me with like everything that you're basing your assessment of Dak Prescott's character on, Stephen A. Smith, is flawed. It's all flawed logic. None of it makes sense.
Believe in him. That's why you got Micah Parsons doing a podcast and coming to.
Hold on, let me go back a few seconds because this was the part that pissed me all the way off. So listen to what he says about Micah and Micah's podcast.
You know I know. You know I've been reporting for 30 years. You know I've seen this. He talking and talking and talking. But at the end of the day, those brothers don't believe in him. That's why you got Micah Parsons doing a podcast and coming to his defense. That's why you got all of these other dudes sticking up for him. Because they know they need to do what they can to elevate his level of confidence, to big up him, to make him believe more in himself. Because they know he got the talent. Stephen A. is on national television telling you right now, Dak Prescott has the talent to win a Super Bowl champion. But do you got that something inside of you?
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying.
I know exactly what you're saying.
This part really pissed me off because let me tell y'all one thing that I'm so sick of. I'm so sick of these people who have never been inside that locker room trying to tell other people what the dudes in that locker room are thinking. Like Stephen A. Smith, you have no idea what these dudes think about Dak Prescott. And don't do that whole, oh, I got sources that say da-da-da-da. No, you haven't been in the locker room, and whoever the sources are, I want to know because I have sources too. I talk to people who are in that locker room every day, who have one-on-one conversations with these players. And before I even started this video, I even checked in with some of those people just to make sure I wasn't tripping. And I'm just like, yo, is there any basis for what he's saying? And they were like, no. So I'm just like, where the hell are you getting this from? If people inside the locker room are saying that that's not true, and there's video evidence to the contrary, and there are social media posts that are evident to the contrary, and there are podcast interviews and YouTube interviews and journalistic interviews and blogs and in newspaper articles that are all evidence to the contrary, where do you get this idea that the guys in the locker room don't have faith in Dak Prescott, that they don't believe in him? Because none of them have ever said that. Nobody has said anything, nobody credible, I should say, has said anything to support that. And if you're going to say they're credible, I mean people who are actually in the locker room talking to these guys. Because yes, there are people who consider themselves fans of the Dallas Cowboys, but they have something against Dak Prescott. And those make up rumors and say all sorts of false things to just make stuff up and cast doubt on Dak Prescott and disparage his name. Okay, fine, whatever. But I'm talking about, when have you ever heard any of the players say something like this? When have you ever heard anybody even say that they heard any of the players say something like this? Especially something that wasn't recanted. Because yes, I've seen situations where players' words have been twisted to make it look one way or another by people like Stephen A. Smith who just don't like Dak Prescott for some reason. And so they'll make up stuff to make it seem like the locker room doesn't support him. But like I said, I talk to people who are literally in that locker room and talk to those players every day. And none of them have ever said anything suggesting that these players don't believe that Dak Prescott has what it takes. So when you say stuff like that, I'm going to need you to back it up with some source, because it sounds like you're just talking shit. It sounds like you're just making stuff up to make your point, and you don't actually have any factual basis to support it. It's irresponsible journalism, and not only are you casting doubt on somebody's character and you're casting doubt on their abilities as a leader, you could be potentially damaging interpersonal relationships with your rumors and your irresponsibility going on national television spewing all kind of false statements about what's happening in the Cowboys locker room. So, like, really, chill out. Find some other way to make your point.
Exactly what you're saying.
And y'all both know the answer to that damn
Listen,
question.
I know exactly what you're saying.
I rest my case.
The quarterback that was in Dallas before Dak Prescott, I was with him, and I realized, you know what? Maybe this guy can do it, maybe he can't, but let me go to a division rival that I know can win a Super Bowl in Eli Manning. I guess the whole point is the Cowboys locker room has proof of concept with Dak Prescott, and not in a good way when it comes to postseason success, because you are talking about a guy that comes up short when they do get into the divisional round. All he's got to show for his success in the postseason is 2 wild card wins, and that ain't good enough down there in Dallas, especially with the talent that Will McClay has put around Dak Prescott. If we're going to pick apart what Dak said to the media, the one thing I would say is, when things go our way, nah, bro, I'm not trying to hear that. You're a $40 million a year quarterback. Make things go our way.
That's right.
When it matters the most.
Chris Cantor, you sound ridiculous. First of all, $40 million isn't even allowed on the quarterback market, so I don't know why you're throwing that out there like that means something. Secondly, who the fuck talks like that? When we make things go our way. Like, no, he said when, not if, which is, I think, an acceptable response from someone who was determined to make this happen. He's not, like, this isn't like some sort of pregame speech. Like, he said when. Like, this is one of the most ridiculous goalpost moves when it comes to a soundbite that I've heard in a long time. No, not when. We're going to make things go. Like, how boisterous do you want him to be? Like, chill, bro.
Things go our way.
That's right.
When it matters the most.
Make it happen.
That's the mentality of champions. That's the mentality of Super Bowl winning quarterbacks. That's what I want to see from Dak.
Go ahead, RC.
When it matters most.
Go ahead, RC.
I agree. Listen, I agree with that totally. But things are the way they are until they aren't. Dak Prescott hasn't shown us that he can show up in the big moments. And so any criticism he receives from Stephen A., from Chris Canty, from RC, all of those criticisms are warranted. But when you say a guy has the talent, I don't think we could speak to what he has in here. I think it's about watching a man mature, watching a man grow, watching him get into those moments and finally persevere. What I'm not going to say about a man that has gone through what Dak Prescott has gone through, that has lost what Dak Prescott has lost in his personal life, and continued to be the dude that stands at that microphone and presents himself like that, is to say that he got what it takes in here. Now, it may not produce, or we may not see it on the football field in the rounds of the playoffs. We want to see it. That's a physical thing that comes from here that you got to make decisions. But I ain't going to say the dude ain't got that.
I
know it's your time to go, Molly. I get it.
We got to go to commercial. I'm coming back to respond directly to that statement he just made. We got to go to commercial. I'm responding to that.
Okay. This is a good time to bring up a tweet made by Mr. Tony Catalina. I appreciate people who make tweets like this because I don't have time to gather these stats. So Tony Catalina is a writer for the Pro Football Network and also for Dallas Cowboys blog, Blogging the Boys. And he made this tweet in response to Ryan Clark's tweet. This was his quote tweet. He said, quote, Dak Prescott hasn't shown us he can show up in the big moments. Since 2016, Dak Prescott has had 13 fourth-quarter comebacks, 20 game-winning drives, and also has one of each of the above category in playoff games as well. He continues, I appreciate the words from Marcy, but people aren't telling the whole story. If you were to take these playoff games and just throw them in a hat with the regular season games, and I'm only saying to do this because we're talking about the talent of Dak Prescott and whether or not he has what it takes. But for some reason, we're only using the playoffs to determine that, which is really weird. So one thing that I always say is due to the fact that the NFL playoffs are a single elimination system, the same any given Sunday bullshit that applies to the regular season also applies to the playoffs. And so that's why I say throw all the games in the hat. And if you want to evaluate Dak Prescott's overall performance, if you want to evaluate him overall as a quarterback, this is one of the things that you'll come up with, that he has had fourth quarter comebacks, that he has had game-winning drives. So he does show up in some really important moments. There are times when he has put the team on his back, but people don't want to talk about those times because they haven't happened often enough in the postseason. And I think that's really unfair because you can't say someone isn't a good quarterback or they don't have what it takes, but then you take into account a small portion of their body of work, which in the grand scheme of things, the postseason is a very small portion of his body of work. This is his 8th season, meaning he's completed 7 seasons in the NFL. He's only been to the playoffs 4 times in his career, which I say only because of what I'm about to say, but let's be clear. That's more times than a lot of quarterbacks have been to the playoffs. And his record of 2-4 is actually even better than some of the people who have been to the playoffs. And when you consider what I said earlier about how if you make it to the playoffs, you're more likely to end up with a losing record or a tied record than a winning one because it is single elimination, a record of 2-4 actually makes sense. It's not that bad. Fans might not like it because in order to have a winning record in the playoffs, that means you made it to a championship game or the Super Bowl. But only 4 quarterbacks a year get to do that. And so what I would say in response to something like this is if you take into the account that he's played 7 seasons, and then for one of those seasons, he damn near missed the whole season due to injury, right? Think about something that you've ever tried to do, which if you've never tried to do something that almost nobody else was able to do, you shouldn't be participating in this conversation anyway. But think about something that is so difficult, almost nobody ever really does it. Because when you think about it, statistically, most quarterbacks don't go to the Super Bowl. Most quarterbacks don't win the Super Bowl. Most of them, right? This isn't like some rite of passage that somehow Dak Prescott is just screwing himself out of. This is something just most quarterbacks don't get to do just because of the nature of the system and how it works in the NFL. Okay. So think about any time that you've ever tried to do something that people said was incredibly hard, damn near impossible, something that most people in your industry don't get to do. And they're going to give you 4 chances to get it perfect. Do you think you could do that? I know people who run businesses, who are entrepreneurs, who are creators, who have spent years trying to perfect what they're doing, who have tried over and over again to start a business, and it took them a few chances to get it right, or a few chances to get something specific about their business right. I know people who have tried to be firefighters or game wardens in Texas, who have had to take those tests multiple times, who have had to train and go through the process multiple times. So those are just some of the things that come to mind like immediately. But I just think in general, if we think about either ourselves or people that we know who have tried to accomplish something that most people can't say they've ever done, something that puts you in the upper echelon of whatever it is that you do, being like, yeah, you got 4 chances to get it perfect, or else for the rest of your career, we're going to say you suck. Most people would be downcast as somebody who sucks. There would be quarterbacks in the NFL who, if you only gave them until the end of their 7th season, it would be like, yeah, you trash. Right? Because the 2 that come to mind immediately are, I believe it was Peyton Manning and Drew Brees, who didn't win it until their 9th season. Dak Prescott is only in his 8th. So I'm just like, where are we getting this idea from? Nobody can give me a rational basis for this idea that Dak Prescott should have won a Super Bowl.
All right, we're back. RC, I know Stephen A. wanted to comment on your last comment, essentially, on what Dak Prescott's made of in terms of his character, what he's been through, how he's still standing, how he conducts himself, and that you would never question that he doesn't have, that inner integrity to win it all.
Let me say this to y'all, and I'm going to get very serious with what I'm about to say really, really quickly. We don't do things like that. And RC, in your defense, put RC up on the screen, please. I want to see him. We don't do that. I know you didn't mean it that way, and I know Molly didn't mean it that way, but I'm going to explain something. We don't do that stuff on this show.
But you just did.
Yo, that personal stuff that Dak went through, our heart goes out to him. Lost his mom years ago, lost his brother, went through some trying times himself. We wish him nothing but the best. As a man, as a human being, as a role model, he's one of the best people in the world. He goes up there every day, just like you said. He represents himself well and represents our community well, and he's one of the great role models that ever exist. I troll Cowboy fans, and I have fun with that, but I know what kind of man Dak Prescott has displayed himself to be, and it's incredibly admirable, inspirational, and motivational. He's a special, special brother. What we're talking about here, however, is there's nothing wrong with distinguishing the difference between sports character and character. What I'm talking about when I talk about Dak Prescott is you need a touchdown, you down 4. It's a big game. San Francisco's coming into the house. They knocked you out of the postseason the last 2 times. You getting ready to go up against them. That kind of character that you're talking about, that's just us talking sports and debating or whatever. I know that there have been other folks in the media at other shows and stuff like that that might cross that line. It's something you, me, Molly, and all the contributors on this show, we make sure we never do, because we human beings first. And we make sure that we don't roll like that. I just want to make sure that we're saying to the audience, when we're talking about this right here, I'm talking about you need a touchdown, you driving downfield, you need to get your team in field goal range.
Stephen A., in some ways, I think you can't kind of compartmentalize it. I think.
Once again, Molly's the one making sense. People need to listen to Molly here more often. I'm just saying.
I think in some ways you're saying you're that man.
I think you can compartmentalize it if you explain it. That's exactly what you mean.
No, you can't. Just because you have an explanation doesn't mean that your explanation is valid. And in this case, it's not. What Molly is saying is absolutely correct. You cannot compartmentalize it because those things are connected. But instead of me going on a rant, I'm going to let Ryan Clark do it.
That's exactly what you're meaning. I think you absolutely can do that.
Yeah,
you're making sure that real quick. LeBron James, when I used to get on him, what would I get on him about? He would sit up there and have an excellent game and everybody's praising him. He has a bad game and somebody's criticizing the game And he'd be like, I'm just trying to be a role model, be a good, role model to the kid. Wait a minute. We just talking.
First of all, Dak Prescott didn't even say anything like that. I don't know why you keep bringing up LeBron James. All Dak said was, yeah, the criticism is what it is, and when we win, it'll just make it that much sweeter. He believes in himself. He didn't say anything about like, well, I'm just trying to be a role model. Stephen A. just be bringing stuff up that I'm just like, what does this even have to do with the topic? Like, you just have figured out your talking points and you care nothing about whether or not they actually apply to the context of the conversation.
We just talking about this game tonight. Tomorrow you'll make up for it. But this performance right here wasn't up to snuff, wasn't up to what we are accustomed to seeing you be. Let's not make it something that it isn't, is all I'm trying to say. Because we don't do that. That's all I'm saying.
But you just did.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I wasn't saying that that's what you meant, Stephen A.
I know.
I was saying that based on me watching Dak Prescott continue to be the man he is, continue to be the leader he is, with going through some of those things, I do believe that builds a callus for you to fight through.
Ryan Clark is so smooth. He's like, I wasn't saying that's what you meant, but let me just go ahead and agree with Molly. Like, I think had he started this statement with, I actually agree with Molly, Stephen A. Smith's response would have been completely different. But by him being like, oh, no, that's not what you meant, he basically disarms Stephen A. Smith and then proceeds to agree with Molly Karam and then just gets it off and doesn't have to worry about actually arguing the point, which there should be no argument. But the reason why I respected it is because of that. Like, there doesn't need to be an argument. And I feel like he knew that. He's like, let me just make this point and we can move on to something else.
A callus for you to fight through the adversity of sport as well. Okay. I do believe that builds a callus to make you the sort of person that understands if I fall, I do have an opportunity to make it right on the field. And that's why I think he feels like it's a win more than the if. Now, if Dak Prescott doesn't have the actual talent to finally get it done, then so be it. But I do believe he's the sort of person that could continue to grind, that could continue to work, and eventually make those plays to get this team to a championship.
And that's what I mean by compartmentalize, like that resiliency off the field.
And Molly's like, yeah, he's agreeing with me.
Carried on the field as well.
I just wanted to make sure we know. That's what we don't do that on first date.
Yeah,
I just want to make sure everybody knows.
But you do, and it's fine. You don't want to be known as a person who does, but you do, and you just did it. It's whatever. Here's my thing. When people talk about what Dak Prescott has been through, they always talk about the tragedies experienced by his family, which I'm sure have weighed on him. And they might continue to do so. Like, I've experienced loss in my family, and it's something that I still think about to this day, even though it's something that happened years ago. So anytime anybody experiences that kind of loss, it doesn't necessarily shock me if they go years and years and it still affects them or impacts them. But here's my thing. Using myself as an example, once again, the loss that I experienced, although it's probably the greatest loss that I've experienced to date, is not the only thing that affects me. There are still other things that happen in my regular daily life that do affect my mood, that do affect my outlook, that do sometimes affect my performance in various ways, right? And so when we're talking about Dak Prescott and what he's been through, it's like, do you think the playoff losses don't affect him? Do you think that having to deal with, constant injuries on his offensive line and the offensive line being in limbo, and having people there sometimes who are not protecting him very well and, being expected to make miracles happen with a wide receiver room that's full of people that can barely get snaps on their new team, or even sometimes, being blamed for play calling that he wasn't responsible for and things of that nature. Y'all think those things don't affect him? Like, no, like all these years, he's dealt with all of those things in one way or another and possibly even more than that. You know what I'm saying? He's dealt with that, and this is his 8th season dealing with it. And yet week after week, he gets in front of the podium, he talks to the media in the locker room, and he always is polite. He always plays a role. The rudest thing this man has ever said is appreciate that. After all these years of going through XYZ with this team. So it's like, even if you just don't even consider the tragedies that he's dealt with in his personal life and other and other situations he might be dealing with in his personal life, right? Even if you don't count that, even if you just look at what's happening on the football side and the amount of criticism that he has to deal with and the amount of pressure that he's under for no reason, him being held accountable for a 30-year history that for the most part, most of those 30 years have nothing to do with him, but people use it to evaluate him and his entire body of work, his entire worth as an athlete all the time. That's gotta be frustrating. Yet this man keeps it together. So even just from an athletic perspective, I don't understand how you can sit there and question his heart and question whether or not he has it in him when we see it week after week, if you're willing to pay attention. But if your only goal, if your only objective is to criticize Dak Prescott and to make him look bad and to make him sound bad, then I guess it's not really worth it to you to pay attention to those things. It's not really worth it to you to actually analyze his full body of work and actually pay attention to what's happening during some of these games. So in closing, I just want us to think about some of the things that Dak Prescott has actually done. So for example, in the 2021 postseason, when the Cowboys faced the San Francisco 49ers, we all remember how that game ended, but let's look at how the rest of the game went. He completed 23 of 43 attempts, 254 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and even had 4 carries for 27 yards. 1 of those was a rushing touchdown. He was sacked 5 times for a loss of 40 yards. If we look at the play-by-play and we look at some of these possessions that ended in punts, and I'm just going through randomly here. I'm literally just looking at the play-by-play and being like, oh, there's a punt. What happened leading up to that? So here's one where they had a 1st and 10 on the Dallas 19. Ezekiel Elliott had a 4-yard carry. Then there was an incomplete pass. That was a short right pass to Ezekiel Elliott. And then Dak Prescott goes into shotgun and completes a pass to CeeDee Lamb at the San Francisco 45 for 32 yards. But then there was a penalty on Williams for offensive holding. 10 yards enforced at the Dallas 23. So that was negated by a penalty. After that, Dak Prescott made a short pass to Cedric Wilson, who fumbled the ball out of bounds. So that put them at 4th and 10, and then they had to punt. Here's one of the field goal drives during that game. So they had a 1st and 10 at the Dallas 30. Dak Prescott was sacked. They ended up recovering the ball at the Dallas 20. So on the 2nd down, they were 2nd and 20. Dak Prescott actually completed a pass to CeeDee Lamb for 18 yards, put them at the Dallas 38. But there was a penalty on CeeDee Lamb for a illegal shift for 5 yards, which put them at 2nd and 25. But Dak still got them out of that one. He made another pass to Cedric Wilson for 24 yards, which put them at 3rd and 1 at the Dallas 39. Ezekiel Elliott ran up the middle for 4 yards, and then that gave them a 1st and 10. And so that's a couple of times that penalties have been mentioned just in a few of the plays that I looked at from that game. So I'm curious. It looks like Dallas that game had 14 penalties for 89 yards. So 14 penalties for 89 yards, and Dak Prescott himself was sacked 5 times for 40 yards. So it's just one of those things that I'm just like, okay, how do you look at Dak Prescott's performance in a vacuum when we're considering those games? Just like, oh, they lost that game because Dak Prescott doesn't have it in them. No, they lost that game because the team as a whole didn't have all the pieces together. They didn't have all the elements necessary to win that game. And by that, I mean the discipline to keep Dak Prescott clean and to also not have so many costly penalties. And then here's one that comes to mind just because I've heard other people talk about it. And I'm gonna be honest, I hate going back to stuff that was this long ago. But since we want to take into account Dak Prescott's entire postseason record and use it to evaluate his whole body of work, that's why we're going back this far. Because like I mentioned earlier, he's only had so many postseason games. So I just feel like if I can shed a little bit of light on 2 of them, that should be enough for most reasonable people to start saying to themselves, okay, maybe the postseason success or lack thereof of the Dallas Cowboys isn't all Dak Prescott's fault. Maybe he has more, maybe he has what it takes. Maybe he has enough in him to get it done. And maybe there are some other factors that are actually affecting the success or failure of the Dallas Cowboys in the postseason. Like what is the case for most teams, you know? So if we go back to the 2018 season, in the postseason, they first faced Seattle. They won 24-22. Good job, guys. And then they faced the Los Angeles Rams in the divisional round. Now, Dak Prescott's stats for this game, solid, not bad. Completed 20 of 32 attempts for 266 yards, 1 touchdown, sacked once, lost 8 yards on that. So for the most part, not bad. No interceptions that game, since we just love talking about Dak Prescott's interceptions. There were no interceptions during that game. But what was interesting is CJ Anderson was one of the running backs who was playing for the Rams during that game. He had 23 carries for a total of 123 yards. Now, why am I bringing him up instead of Todd Gurley? Well, it's because of this. So here's a headline that says, Rams rush past Cowboys, advance with 30 to 22 playoff victory. This article starts, with 1 yard between the Los Angeles Rams and the Dallas end zone on 4th down midway through in the 4th quarter, Sean McVay decided to go straight ahead. No clever plays for this high-flying offense, no elaborate schemes from their inventive coach. CJ Anderson ran directly into the left side while his line cleared a path. He tumbled into the end zone with 7:16 left for the Rams' final points in their first playoff victory in 14 years, 30-22 over the Cowboys on Saturday night in the divisional round. Now, this other article actually answers the question of why I'm bringing up CJ Anderson and not Todd Gurley, although both of their stats are relevant. But this article was written for Slate.com by Nick Green on January 13, 2019. And it says, all hail CJ Anderson, the Los Angeles Rams playoff hero? ? Midway through this article, Mr. Green mentions, Anderson is a journeyman backup who didn't join the Rams until December 18th, but the running back rushed for 123 yards and 2 touchdowns in Los Angeles's 30-22 win over Dallas in the divisional round on Saturday. He might be the greatest temp in history. Anderson had been released by 3 separate teams in 2018 alone. The Rams signed him after Gurley suffered a knee injury in December, and they rode the former Broncos running back during the final 2 weeks of the regular season. He proved to be a wrecking ball in those games, but no one outside the Los Angeles locker room could have expected him to feature so heavily against the Cowboys. So in other words, this dude basically rolled up off the couch, trained for a couple of weeks, and then put up 123 yards on the Dallas Cowboys defense. 2 touchdowns. They couldn't stop a dude who was known as a temp, as a backup. They let that dude actually outperform Todd Gurley during that game. So it's like, when you look at Dak Prescott's numbers, I can't, if I have to point to something to blame that loss on, which I don't like to play that game, but since I have to play that game, since that's the game that we're playing, if I had to point to something to blame that loss on, it would not be Dak Prescott. It would be the Dallas Cowboys defense, who got ran all over. Between Todd Gurley and CJ Anderson alone, it was a total of 273 yards. So it's basically like these two people, they couldn't figure out how to stop these two people. It's not like this was an onslaught from the running backs of the Los Angeles Rams. Basically, if they could have stopped the dude who wasn't even playing a few weeks before that game occurred, the outcome of that game might have been different. So when we take games like this and we use this to say Dak Prescott doesn't have it in him, yes, that kind of pisses me off. It's unfair to Dak Prescott. It really is. Now, I feel like if we want to have this conversation responsibly, let's actually look at what Dak Prescott does game in, game out. Because Dak Prescott isn't perfect. So it's not like there aren't things that you could criticize him for, but that would involve you actually being knowledgeable. That would actually involve you paying attention to the person that you talk about so much and not just following a narrative and perpetuating a narrative. It would involve you actually understanding something about his game and his performance as a quarterback and as an athlete. It would involve you understanding context. It would involve you taking a little bit of nuance into consideration. And we all know that Stephen A. Smith is not going to do that. And Chris Canty, in this conversation, he's barely worth addressing. So all I really want people to do is, I'm not even saying don't criticize Dak Prescott. All I'm saying is criticize him on things that he actually did. If you're going to take into account his whole body of work, actually educate yourself on his whole body of work. And for goodness sake, stop just making up these things about the locker room not believing in him. Or if you are, tell us where it came from. Because I'm sorry, with there being so much evidence out there to the contrary, when you say things like that, you're going to have to give us some evidence. People don't like to name their sources, but this is one situation that if you're going to contradict every bit of information that's out there in terms of how this locker room feels about Dak Prescott and whether or not they believe in him, I'm going to need you to name names, at least one, because somebody's got to explain where this is coming from. But anyway, I don't want to spend all night on this. if it weren't for me kind of publicly making a promise and talking about this with a couple of people, I probably wouldn't have even made this video at all. So, like I always say, if y'all really are interested in hearing more, leave it in the comments, tweet me, and I will work on a time, maybe even grab a guest or two, and we can talk more about this. But for now, I feel like I've said enough. So like I said on Twitter, props to Ryan Clark for standing up to Dak in that situation. I don't agree with what Ryan Clark said in terms of Dak Prescott not showing up in big moments. As I said, based on Tony Catalina's tweet, that's not the case. He has shown up and carried the team on his back several times, but it's just not right to only consider the playoffs when you're evaluating whether or not he's done that or whether or not he's capable of doing that. So that's me speaking my piece for now. It's late. I won't say how late it is, but it's late enough to where I'm ready to turn this off, do the editing, and get it out for all you guys to watch. If you like what you heard, like, subscribe, share, turn your notifications on, all the things. If you're new here, go look back at some of my old videos, have fun with that, and hope to see you on my next live stream. Until then, this is Jasmine with the BLS Podcast, and I'm out.